Hello everyone, this is Dungeon Master Lobo with Firestar Roleplaying, coming at you again with another video. This one was requested by a viewer, and he asked I should make a video on how to do a fantasy role-playing game that has a bunch of different species in it. I'm going to tell you guys some advice on how I run games that have a bunch of different species in fantasy worlds, and how those species interact with each other, and how to deal with species that are conflicting. The best way I can think of to describe this is just think about the real world medieval Europe, and think about how did they react to people who weren't, in their vision of the world. How did they react to, how did they treat the Jewish population a lot of the time, for example. And that's how a lot of species will probably be treated if they're in the minority. Now, if you're like a cultural melting pot, like the City of Trade and the Withing of Fire setting, then things might be a little bit different. But if you're in a city that's primarily dominated by one species, think, how does that species treat the other ones? Why are they allowed to be there? Why don't they just kill them, kick them out, enslave them, etc.? Think why they don't do this and then play on that. Are the species friends? Are they enemies that begrudgingly allow them into the city with them? The best way you can do this is to get to know the species. Read everything you can about them and up on your setting. If you feel like your setting doesn't provide you with enough information, make it up, because it's your world. You might be using a particular setting, but this is your custom version of that setting. So make up the information you don't have. Or ask if other people have run into this problem, see if they have good ideas. And ask around on forums or whatever, and see if anybody has an idea that you might want to use. Also, with people who are antagonistic to one another, try not to let your players play two different races that are blatantly going to try to kill each other. Like in the Withing of Fire setting, there's Freynes and Mihongi, which are two types of Fae, and they despise each other. In some settings, dwarves and elves don't like each other. So unless you have a very experienced role-playing group and you agree ahead of time to let everyone know that, hey, this is going to be happening, I would suggest avoiding that. The best way you can do things is get everyone together against a common enemy. Maybe their species are antagonistic to one another, but then there's a bigger threat, whether it be natural disaster, foreign invasion, or whatever, and then try to unify them around that. Or you could just make it so that everyone plays as one species and are unified against other species, like you could have elves versus dwarves type thing. And if you want to have a big city that has a ton of different species in it, think about, it's going to be a lot of work to build that kind of city, but just think about each species' place in the hierarchy of that city. Is the city racist? Is the city equal? I mean, no city is truly going to be equal. There's always going to be some sort of favoritism. But think about whether this race is looked down upon, or this race is held in high regard. Do these two species get together? Do these two species, have rivalries? And think about how that could give you some extra plot hooks. For example, if you want to play in a massive multicultural city and your players are all different species, that could be a very interesting yet challenging game to pull off, compared to if you wanted to do something where they were all the same species. Sorry about that, somebody just walked in. But it's a lot more difficult to pull off something where everyone is of a different species and compared to everyone being the same species. Alright, some technical problems there. The camera on the phone kept cutting out because of some technical problems, but anyways, it should be fixed. As I was saying, if you want to play everyone being different species, you need to really get a good understanding of your players and make sure that they have a good understanding of the species that they're trying to play. and also make sure that you have a good understanding of what they're trying to play, and that how they would interact with each other, and how the other species in the world is going to interact with your players. I would highly recommend sticking to, if your group isn't experienced with the setting or just isn't experienced in general, I'd highly recommend sticking to one particular race or species of fantasy creatures, like all dwarves, all elves, all humans, or whatever, and get a good understanding for the world at hand before you go off and everyone play something, you know, out there and different. Overall, I really recommend keeping, you know, the mixing and matching of all these different species to a minimum, unless you are very confident and comfortable with the setting you're running. Once you're confident and comfortable with your setting, then go crazy, you know, do whatever you want. And if you are not, make sure to stick with the simple, just stick with the basics, you know. And don't think that, you know, just because everyone is playing one type of thing, that the game's going to be boring or stale or whatever, because it's not. If you do good enough and you put enough effort into it, you could have a group of 4 or 5 humans, dwarves, elves, or what have you, and then have an extremely interesting game. The Hobbit, which is very popular, had virtually nothing but dwarves in it, with, you know, 1 human and 1 hobbit. But, and well, again, that's not really human, but anyways, you get the point. Is that they had a vast majority of the party was one particular race, and then everyone loves that. You know, it spawned the Lord of the Rings and all that stuff, one of the most popular fantasy franchises ever. So don't think that having one type of thing will hamper your game. The only thing that hampers your game is when people aren't having fun. And if you're open-minded and everything, and you're good role players, you can have fun with just about anything. And that's what it all comes down to in the end, is make sure that you know what you're doing with your game so that everyone is having fun. And if you're not going to have fun doing something, just don't do it. Just tell your players you don't feel comfortable running a game where one person plays this thing, one person plays this thing, because they won't get along, because you don't understand the world enough or whatever. Just tell your players you're not ready for that, you're not comfortable with running that kind of game, and just go do other stuff, to read more, think more, and just try to get yourself better prepared for that. But yeah, that should just about cover the basics on this thing. Sorry the video is a little bit all over the place. I'll try to do a little bit more controlled video next time. If you have any more video suggestions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. I have a few already from you guys, and I'll try to get them put out whenever I get the time. But anyways, this is Dungeon Master Lobo of Firestar Roleplaying, signing off.